Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling one of the biggest mysteries in all of science, consciousness. Yeah, not just what it does, but what it actually is. And we're going to explore a really fascinating theory that suggests the answer isn't in some kind of biological computer, but in the fundamental physics of the universe itself.
I mean, just think about your own experience right this second. You're not hearing my voice over here, and seeing your screen over there, and feeling the temperature of the room as three separate things, right? No, it all just blends together into one seamless reality, a single unified now. So how on earth does the brain pull off that magic trick?
Well, that puzzle has a name. Neuroscientists call it the binding problem. How does your brain take billions of neurons, all firing away in different places at different times, and bind all that chaos into a single coherent experience? It's a huge question, and today we're diving into a radical new idea, a theory that consciousness isn't an illusion, but a literal state of matter, all governed by the weird and wonderful rules of quantum mechanics.
Okay, so let's get into it. How would this quantum mind even work? To really appreciate how different this idea is, we first need to look at the standard way we usually think about the brain. So, what you're seeing here really changes the whole metaphor for the brain. The classical view, the one we're all kind of used to, basically treats the brain like a computer. It processes separate bits of information from all your senses and then has to somehow stitch it all together later on. But this quantum view, it flips the script. It says there's no stitching needed because at the most fundamental level, the information was never separate to begin with. It's all part of one single unified physical state. And this is the absolute heart of the theory, macroscopic quantum coherence. Now, let's be super clear. This is not a metaphor. The idea here is that your subjective awareness, that feeling of you being you right now, is the physical reality of billions upon billions of particles in your brain losing their individuality and starting to behave as one single, coherent quantum wave, one entity.
Okay, and this brings us to the million-dollar question. This has always been the single biggest objection to any quantum theory of consciousness. We all know quantum states are ridiculously fragile. The slightest bit of heat, the tiniest bit of noise, what physicists call decoherence, and poof, they're gone. And well, the brain is about as warm, wet, and noisy as it gets. So how could this possibly work?
Well, the theory argues that life didn't just get lucky and stumble upon this quantum state. It says that life actively engineered a biological shield to protect and maintain it. And this shield, it's not just one thing. It's a brilliant three-layered system designed to create a decoherence-free zone right in the middle of all that biological chaos.
So think of it like this amazing synergistic system. First, the very structure of our cells creates these exclusion zones which act like noise-canceling headphones, filtering out all the thermal vibrations. Second, a special property of our molecules creates what are basically frictionless superhighways for energy and information to travel on. And third, groups of molecules learn to glow together, in perfect unison, creating a single super robust quantum bit that's way harder to disturb than any single molecule would be on its own.
Let's look a little closer at that frictionless highway. It's a real property called chirality-induced spin selectivity, or CIS for short. Turns out, because the building blocks of life, like amino acids, all have this specific left or right-handed twist, they act like perfect guides for electrons. The electrons can just zip right through them without scattering or losing energy as heat. It's basically nature's own superconductor.
Now, when you add up the effects of all these shielding mechanisms, the result is, well, it's just staggering. The typical background thermal noise in a brain is around 26 millielectron volts, but inside one of these biologically engineered shields, the effective noise level could be slashed by 1,000 or even more. And all of a sudden, having a stable quantum state inside a living brain doesn't seem so crazy after all. Okay, so let's say biology pulls it off. It builds this perfectly quiet little sanctuary for a quantum state to exist. But we have another problem. A quantum state can exist in a superposition, multiple possibilities at once. To have a single definite thought or experience, something has to collapse that superposition into one single reality. So what does that? And this is where things get truly mind-bending. Because the theory borrows an idea from the legendary physicist Sir Roger Penrose. He asked a brilliant question. What if the observer that's required to collapse a quantum state isn't a person at all? What if it's one of the fundamental forces of the universe? What if the collapse is caused by gravity? Here's how that would work. A system in your brain enters a superposition of different possibilities.
As it does, its own gravitational pull creates this tiny bit of tension in spacetime that builds and builds over time. Once that tension hits a critical threshold, the Penrose limit, the system just can't take it anymore and bam! It collapses into a single definite state. And that collapse, that bam, is a moment of consciousness. This process just repeats over and over, creating our stream of conscious moments, with gravity itself acting as a kind of universal clock.
Now, for this to work, you need something in the brain that's actually massive enough, at least on a quantum scale, for its own gravity to matter. And, get this, biology might already have the perfect candidates. They're called otoconia. They're these tiny, incredibly dense crystals in our inner ear that we use for balance. And it just so happens they are almost the perfect mass for their gravitational influence to trigger these collapses at a rate that roughly matches our stream of consciousness. But wait, what makes sure the entire brain collapses at once to create one unified consciousness instead of a million tiny separate ones? The theory points to something you might not expect: your heart. That rhythmic pressure wave from your heartbeat isn't just noise, it's the conductor's baton. It acts like a global clock, a strobe light that synchronizes all of these gravitational collapses across the whole neural system, making sure every conscious moment is one single, unified frame. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds incredibly speculative, like something straight out of science fiction. But here's the beautiful thing about this framework, and what makes it real science, is that it moves beyond just philosophy. It makes concrete, falsifiable predictions that we can actually go out and test in a lab. And what's so cool is how these predictions connect the cosmic all the way down to the clinical. For example, the theory predicts that general anesthetics work by literally breaking that collective quantum glow of molecules, something we can measure. It predicts that in the microgravity of space, the quantum state of those little otoconia crystals should last just a fraction of a second longer. It even predicts we can sync up our body's rhythms by applying weak magnetic fields tuned to Earth's natural resonance. These aren't just thought experiments, they're real, testable ideas.
So what this all points to is a pretty radical rethinking of what life itself even is. In this model, life isn't just a complicated chemical reaction that happens to obey the laws of physics. Instead, life is an active process of engineering the quantum vacuum, of filtering out noise, of guiding energy, and of shielding a delicate, coherent state from the rest of the chaotic universe.
And that is the truly provocative takeaway here. It leaves us with this one profound question to chew on. What if life isn't just passively adapting to its environment? What if, at its most fundamental level, life is an active process of sculpting the very fabric of reality to create a quiet, protected space for consciousness to emerge? A space where the universe, through us, finally gets the chance to observe itself.